On February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, in a major escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian War, which began in 2014. The invasion has likely resulted in tens of thousands of deaths on both sides, and caused Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel, Striving for a Better World. Today we'll be breaking down the events of the Ukraine and Russia war, 7 months into this conflict. I hope you find this video very insightful. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and do give us a thumbs up at some point during this video. Please join the cause, as proceeds from this channel will go to Ukrainian charities. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's focus a bit on Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign nation, with a population of 41 million people, and shares a land border with Russia that spans 1,974 kilometers. Ukraine is a beautiful country, with many beautiful cities like Kyiv, Crimea, Mariupol, Irpin, and so many more, and boasts a very rich history. Its capital Kyiv was founded between 482 AD and the 9th century, making it at least 200 years older than Moscow. Ukraine had as many as 3,000 nuclear weapons deployed on its territory, when it became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, equivalent to the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and dismantle the nuclear weapons in Ukraine left by the USSR. In return, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States agreed in the Budapest Memorandum to uphold the territorial integrity of Ukraine. In 1999, Russia signed the Charter for European Security, which reaffirmed the inherent right of each and every participating state to be free to choose or change its security arrangements, including treaties of alliance. Following the Euromaidan protests in 2013, and the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, ordinary Ukrainian people rose up against its oppressive government, to demand a more democratic and incorrupt political system, in what is known as the Ukrainian Revolution of 2014. This resulted in the removal of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014. Pro-Russian unrest erupted in eastern and southern parts of Ukraine, and Russian soldiers without markings invaded Ukraine on February 20, 2014, and took control of strategic positions and infrastructure in the Ukrainian territory of Crimea and seized the Crimean parliament. Russia organized a controversial referendum, whose outcome was for Crimea to join Russia. Russia's annexation of Crimea followed in March 2014, then the war in Donbas, which began in April 2014 with the formation of two Russia-backed separatist quasi-states, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. Russian troops were involved in the conflict. In 2021, Putin refused offers from Zelensky to hold high-level talks. Russia's updated national security strategy, published in May 2021, said that Russia may use forceful methods to thwart or avert unfriendly actions that threaten the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Russian Federation. The annexation of Crimea led to a new wave of Russian nationalism, with much of the Russian neo-imperial movement aspiring to annex more Ukrainian land, including the unrecognized Novorossiya. When in early December 2021 Russia denied plans to invade Ukraine, the US released intelligence, including satellite photographs of Russian troops and equipment near the Russo-Ukrainian border, that indicated otherwise, and continued to accurately predict invasion events. The intelligence also said that the Russians had a list of key sites, and of individuals to be killed or neutralized in the invasion. If all this sounds familiar, that's because it is. Fast forward to 2022, and Russia once again invaded Ukraine. By 5 a.m. Kyiv time, on the morning of February 24, 2022, Putin announced a special military operation in eastern Ukraine, and effectively declared war on Ukraine. In his speech, Putin said he had no plans to occupy Ukrainian territory, and that he supported the right of the Ukrainian people to self-determination. He said the purpose of the operation was to protect the people in the predominantly Russian-speaking region of Donbas, who he falsely claimed that for 8 years now, had been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kyiv regime. Putin said that Russia sought the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Within minutes of Putin's announcement, explosions were reported in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa and the Donbas region. An alleged leaked report from within the FSB claimed that the intelligence agency was not warned of Putin's plan to invade Ukraine. Immediately following the attack, Zelensky declared martial law in Ukraine. The same evening, he ordered a general mobilization of all Ukrainian males between 18 and 60 years old, who were prohibited from leaving the country. Russian troops entered Ukraine from the north in Belarus towards Kyiv, from the northeast in Russia towards Kharkiv, from the east in the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, and from the south in Crimea. Russian equipment and vehicles were marked with a white Z military symbol, a non-Cyrillic letter, believed to be a measure to prevent friendly fire. Russia apparently tried to rapidly seize Kyiv, with Spetsnaz infiltrating into the city, supported by airborne operations and a rapid mechanized advance from the north, but was unsuccessful. Russian forces advancing on Kyiv from Belarus gained control of the ghost towns of Chernobyl and Pripyat. Russian airborne forces attempted to seize two key airfields near Kyiv, launching an airborne assault on Antonov Airport and a similar landing at Vasilkiv, near Vasilkiv Air Base, on February 26. The Russian Navy reportedly began an amphibious assault on the coast of the Sea of Azov, 70 km west of Mariupol. On February 26, the siege of Mariupol began as the attack moved east, linking to separatist-held Donbas. The Russians captured the nuclear plant at Zaporizhia and installed heavy artillery and mobile missile launchers between the separate reactor walls of the nuclear installation, as a shield against possible Ukrainian counterattack, not possible without the risk of radiation fallout, in case of near misses against the installed Russian artillery sites. On March 2, Russian troops won a battle at Kherson, the first major city to fall to Russian forces in the invasion. In the east, Russian troops attempted to capture Kharkiv, less than 35 km from the Russian border, and met strong Ukrainian resistance. Izium was reportedly captured by Russian forces on March 17, although fighting continued. As of March 5, a large Russian convoy, reportedly 64 km or 40 miles long, had made little progress toward Kyiv. The London-based think tank, Royal United Services Institute, assessed Russian advances from the north and east as stalled. Russian forces continued to advance on Kyiv from the northwest, capturing Bucha, Hostomel, and Vorzel, though Irpin remained contested. By March 11, the lengthy convoy had largely dispersed and taken cover. On March 16, Ukrainian forces began a counteroffensive to repel Russian forces. Unable to achieve a quick victory in Kyiv, Russian forces switched their strategy to indiscriminate bombing and siege warfare. After renewed missile attacks on March 14 in Mariupol, the Ukrainian government said more than 2,500 people had died. By this time, Mariupol was completely encircled and fighting reached the city center, hampering efforts to evacuate civilians. On March 20, an art school sheltering around 400 people was destroyed by Russian bombs. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister said that more than 85% of the whole town is destroyed. A Russian missile attack on a Kramatorsk railway station, in the city of Kramatorsk, took place on April 8, reportedly killing at least 52 and injuring 87 to 300 civilians. The New York Times confirmed that Russia had launched a renewed invasion front, referred to as an eastern assault, across a 480-kilometer front, extending from Kharkiv to Donetsk and Luhansk, with simultaneous missile attacks again directed at Kyiv in the north and Lviv in western Ukraine. A Russian brigadier general, Rustem Minakyev, in a defense ministry meeting, said that Russia planned to extend its Mykolaiv-Odessa front after the siege of Mariupol, further west, to include the breakaway region of Transnistria, on the Ukrainian border with Moldova. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine described this intention as imperialism, saying that it contradicted previous Russian claims, that it did not have territorial ambitions in Ukraine, and that the statement was an admission that the goal of the second phase of the war is not victory over the mythical Nazis, but simply the occupation of eastern and southern Ukraine. In May, the Ukrainian General Staff announced that the Mariupol garrison had fulfilled its combat mission, and that final evacuations from the Azovstal steel factory had begun. The military said that 264 service members were evacuated to Olenivka under Russian control, while 53 of them who were seriously injured had been taken to a hospital controlled by Russian forces. On May 22, the BBC reported that, after the fall of Mariupol, Russia had intensified offensives in Luhansk and Donetsk, while concentrating missile attacks and intense artillery fire on Severodonetsk, the largest city under Ukrainian control in the Luhansk province. It was reported that possibly as many as 800 Ukrainian civilians, and 300 to 400 soldiers, were besieged at the Azot chemical factory in Severodonetsk. With the Ukrainian defenses of Severodonetsk faltering, Russian invasion troops began intensifying their attack upon the neighboring city of Lysychansk, as their next target city in the invasion. On June 20 it was reported that Russian troops continued to tighten their grip on Severodonetsk, by capturing surrounding villages and small settlements surrounding the city, most recently the village of Metelkine. On June 24, CNN reported that amid continuing scorched earth tactics being applied by advancing Russian troops, Ukraine's armed forces were ordered to evacuate the city. They'd leave several hundred civilians seeking refuge in the Azot chemical plant in Severodonetsk, which has been compared to the civilian refugees left at the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol during May. On the 3rd of July, CBS announced that the Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the city of Lysychansk had been captured and occupied by Russian forces. The Guardian reported that after the fall of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian invasion troops would continue their invasion into the adjacent Donetsk Oblast to attack the cities of Slavyansk and Bakhmut. However, things have been at a standstill since Russia took control of the city of Lysychansk. On August 29, Zelensky advisedly vowed the start of a full-scale counteroffensive in the southeast. He first announced a counteroffensive to retake Russian-occupied territory in the south, concentrating on the Kherson to Mykolaiv region, a claim that was corroborated by the Ukrainian parliament as well as Operational Command South. At the start of the operation, the Ukrainian operational group Kakhovka and some Ukrainian officials claimed that their forces had broken through defensive lines, manned by the 109th DPR Regiment and Russian paratroopers. On September 6, 2022, Ukrainian forces launched a surprise counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region, beginning near Balaklia. By September 12, an emboldened Kyiv launched a counteroffensive in the area surrounding Kharkiv, with sufficient success for Russia to publicly admit to losing key positions in the area. The New York Times reported in two front-page articles that the success of the counteroffensive dented the image of a mighty Putin, and led to encouraging the government in Kyiv to seek more arms from the West to sustain its counteroffensive in Kharkiv and surrounding areas. Ukraine have reclaimed over 8,300 square kilometers of territory in the Kharkiv Oblast, and the entire operation took less than a week to be completed, leaving everyone in the Russian army shocked and panicking. Russian troops left in such a hurry, some didn't even have time to finish their meals. They also left a lot of ammunition and soldiers behind. A lot of their soldiers died, and many had to surrender because of how quick the Ukrainian offensive was. They didn't even have time to mobilize or even regroup to put up a proper defense. On September 21, 2022, Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization. He also said that his country will use all means, nuclear option included, to defend itself. Later that day, the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, stated that 300,000 reservists would be called on a compulsory basis. Former Mongolian president accused Russia of using Russian Mongols as cannon fodder. The defense minister announced mobilization of 300,000, but something hidden in paragraph 7 allows the government to mobilize over 1 million, and the Kremlin isn't willing to clarify this paragraph, and this has led to panic in the Russian society. This partial mobilization, which has happened in Russia for the first time since World War II, has made the atmosphere in Russia tense, and people all across Russia are now being affected. This announcement by Russia's president also included the referendum votes to be held in the partially controlled territories of Ukraine. Because of this embarrassing defeat on the battlefield, Vladimir Putin, who is under a lot of pressure because he knows that time is running out for him in this war, and he has only a few options to save face or even use to put himself in a better position at the negotiation table, had to find a way to be even on the battlefield. The mobilization is similar in many ways to the special military operation, in that Putin disguises his real intentions in his announcements, he doesn't make the message really clear for ordinary Russians to understand, and his state-controlled media bombard the Russian population with lies and propaganda about the West, denazification, and this so-called nuclear threat against Russia. But to be clear here, no Western country's government has threatened Russia with nuclear weapons. There are people with Nazi ideology in a lot of countries, including, you guessed it, Russia. So it is very clear to see that from the start it was always about the land grab. A point worth noting is that Vladimir Putin has been following Hitler playbook in every way. The Nazi symbol, which is like the Z symbol in Russian circles, and on their army equipment, people being tortured, capturing territory and trying to force their language onto people. Russia is even now referring to the pro-Russian separatists in Luhansk and Donetsk as allies, like the Allied forces in World War II. The Russian government has changed its tone, and recently started telling its citizens to stop being relaxed, and that much harder times are coming, which indicates that the Kremlin is in this for the long haul. People are panic buying because they expect something bad is going to happen. Their society is being affected by all the chaos. How bad? Only time will tell. Mobilization gives the Russian government more control and ownership of the people, which it already had a strict no-dissent policy towards. Any opposition to the Kremlin's stance was only allowed as far as the Kremlin was willing to tolerate. Citizens are now being handed papers, who have no military experience, and protesters that are arrested are handed papers to be drafted in the war. A new legal regulation of labor relations law passed July 6, 2022, now means that any company of the government's choosing is now obligated to produce anything that would assist the army with its anti-terrorist and other special military operations. Since Russia's mobilization and annexation of Ukraine's 4 territories, the Ukrainian army have reclaimed Lyman, which Russia occupied for several months, pouring cold water on the idea of this being Russian land. Before, Russian business owners could do whatever business legally that they wanted to do. This new law gives the government more control over businesses, to tell the companies what to produce, or failure to do so is a crime. People are fleeing Russia by any means possible. Flights out of Russia have been sold out, lines miles long at the border between Russia and other countries. Approximately 100,000 Russians have fled to Kazakhstan alone, to avoid being drafted into the army to fight in Ukraine. In the Kazakh city of Oral, a movie theater is allowing Russians who can't find or afford housing in the city, to stay there temporarily. It's going really bad for Russia, and it's going to get worse really quickly. That's all for now. Please subscribe if you like these videos. And please, stay safe.